The jungle was not quiet. For any creature foolish enough to wander into the black-vined canopy of Calcaris, for silence was death. Predators ruled with fangs sharper than forged alloy, and prey scuttled endlessly, rarely lasting more than a few minutes in the open. That was the balance. That was the law. And it had remained unbroken for 1,000 generations. So when the cubs of the Drex Pride bounded out of the underbrush squealing and snarling, their amber eyes locked on a figure seated by a glowing ember pit, it was expected they would do what all cubs of hunters did: stalk, bite, tear, kill. Instead, they stumbled to a halt, their spines rising, their little talons flexing, and then, inexplicably, they climbed onto the strange creature's lap. The human didn't flinch. Dr. Elias Grant, a biologist from Earth, had long since abandoned the idea of safety on this research mission. His shuttle had crashed weeks ago, most of his supplies had either burned up or been carried off by six-legged scavengers, and the distress beacon sat somewhere deep in the mangled wreckage, stubbornly refusing to transmit. What he did have was fire, a crude shelter of woven fronds, and the stubborn determination that had earned humans their reputation as the species too ridiculous to die. What he did not have, however, was any explanation for why 3 alien predator cubs, each with needle-like fangs and stubby horns, had decided that his lap was the safest place in the galaxy. One yawned. Another kneaded his thigh like a house cat. The third curled against his chest, growling softly, though the growl had no threat in it. It was the sound of contentment. Elias froze. His mind calculated the odds, as though math might protect him. If there were cubs, then there was a mother. If there was a mother, she was hunting. And if she was hunting, she would notice very, very soon that her offspring had decided to abandon her evolutionary training in favor of snuggling against a mammal who smelled of smoke, sweat, and fear. This was, without question, how he was going to die. The canopy rustled above. Elias's head shot up. His hand, slick with cub fur and anxiety, reached for the only weapon he had, a sharpened branch, blackened at one end. His heart pounded like a war drum. He imagined the predator mother's jaws closing around him in one swift snap. But nothing came. Instead, the cub in his lap sneezed, spraying him with a fine mist of warm saliva. The absurdity almost made him laugh. Almost. He caught himself in time, clamped his jaw shut, and whispered under his breath, "Great. Just great. I'm a babysitter now." The cubs didn't understand the words, but they understood the tone. One of them chirped, an almost bird-like sound, and pawed at his jacket. Elias swallowed, his scientist's brain warring with his survival instincts. He should push them away. He should scare them off, send them back to wherever they belonged before their mother noticed. But he didn't. Instead, he studied them. Their scales, yes, scales, fine and metallic along the ridges of their backs, were warm to the touch, not cold-blooded as he would have guessed. Their horns were still growing, translucent at the tips. Their paws were armed with claws that could tear through leather, yet they tucked them in carefully when they pressed against him. "Not trying to hurt me," he muttered. "Not yet." The jungle shifted again. A low, guttural roar rolled through the trees. The cubs stiffened. Their ears, small triangular flaps that reminded Elias strangely of wolf pups, flattened against their heads. One buried its face against his chest. "Oh, you've got to be kidding me," Elias hissed. "You're hiding behind me?" Another roar. Closer. Elias's grip on the branch tightened. Every rational cell in his brain screamed at him to throw the cubs aside and run. Yet another part, deeper, older, more stubborn, whispered that running wouldn't matter. The mother would smell him before he'd taken 3 steps. So instead, Elias did the most irrational thing he could. He fed the fire. The sudden bloom of flame crackled upward, sparks flying into the night air. The cubs squealed but didn't run. They pressed closer, their bodies trembling against him. Elias's eyes locked on the shifting shadows at the tree line. And then she emerged. The mother was colossal. Twice the height of a man at the shoulder, her hide a patchwork of armored plates, her jaws dripping with saliva that sizzled as it hit the jungle floor. Her horns curved upward like twin scythes, and her eyes, amber and unblinking, fixed on the sight before her, her offspring nestled contently against the alien. Elias's mouth went dry. His muscles turned to stone. This was the end. The predator padded forward slowly, her every step shaking the ground. She rumbled deep in her chest, a warning that made Elias's teeth vibrate. The cubs, however, didn't flinch. One chirped again. Another licked his chin. And the mother froze. Her nostrils flared. She tilted her massive head, scenting the air, assessing. Her growl lessened, not gone, but uncertain. Elias's mind, even in sheer panic, recorded every detail. This was behavior. This was social structure. This was something new. Predators didn't hesitate. Predators didn't pause to consider. Unless the cubs were signaling something. Unless. The mother lowered her head. Her nose came within inches of Elias's face. He could see each scale glisten, each scar crisscross her snout. Her breath was hot and foul, thick with the stench of blood and meat. The cubs chirped again. And the mother did not strike. Elias sat there, frozen, cubs squirming in his lap, as the most dangerous predator on Calceres 4 sniffed him like a strange but tolerated object. Then, with a snort that blew ash into the fire, she withdrew. Her eyes glowed once more in the shadows, and then she vanished back into the jungle. Elias didn't breathe until the night swallowed her completely. The cubs, satisfied, curled against him and drifted into sleep. He stared down at them, his expression a mixture of terror and bafflement. He whispered to himself, because there was no one else left to hear. "What the hell have you gotten yourself into, Grant?" He looked at the cubs again. Small, vulnerable, absurdly trusting. And he realized the stakes were no longer about surviving alone. His fire, his shelter, his determination, that wasn't enough anymore. Because if the cubs had chosen him, then their world, and their deadly mother, had chosen him too. And the jungle never let go of what it claimed. Elias woke to the sensation of sharp teeth nibbling at his boot. For a moment his half-dreaming brain conjured horrors. The mother returned, jaws closing, bones snapping. His body lurched upright in panic. The cub, however, looked up at him with a mouthful of leather and a smug, satisfied squeak, as if it had achieved some great victory. "Fantastic," Elias muttered, shoving his boot thief gently aside. "First night with you lot, and I'm already breakfast." The other two were awake as well. One pawed curiously at the embers of the fire, yanking its talons back with a surprised hiss. The third had climbed halfway up his makeshift shelter and was attempting to hang upside down like a bat, its stubby horns knocking against the woven fronds. Elias rubbed his face. He had survived the night. That alone felt like a statistical impossibility. But now came the second, equally impossible task, surviving the day. The jungle of Calceres 4 didn't ease its grip when the sun rose. If anything, the dangers multiplied. Daylight meant hunting packs moved freely. It meant the aerial predators would have a clear view of anything unlucky enough to step into a clearing. And it meant Elias had to move. He couldn't stay in one place long enough for the scent of blood to draw in scavengers. That had been his routine for days now. Move, forage, move again. Always one step ahead of the food chain. It had worked, barely. But now... He glanced down at the cubs. They blinked at him expectantly. One trilled, as if to say, "What's for breakfast, giant furless thing?" "Oh no," Elias said. "No, no, no. You're not my responsibility. I'm not your parent. I'm not even the same species. You've got a perfectly functional mother out there with teeth the size of my arm, so..." The cub that had been chewing his boot headbutted his shin. Hard. Elias winced. "Right. Of course. Logic doesn't work on toddlers, why would it work on alien lizards?" And so it began. He tried walking away. They followed. He tried doubling back, weaving through roots and undergrowth. They followed. He even tried climbing a low branch, thinking maybe instinct would keep them from leaving the ground. They sat below him and yowled until the noise threatened to bring every predator in a kilometer radius. It was absurd. It was reckless. It was suicidal. And yet, as he trudged through the damp heat, sweat soaking into his clothes, Elias realized he couldn't shake them even if he wanted to. They were his shadow now. The first complication arrived by midday. He had been following the faint burble of a stream, hoping to refill his water skin, when the underbrush ahead erupted. A herd of long-legged grazers burst through, eyes wild, horns snapping branches as they fled something unseen. Elias dove aside, clutching the cubs instinctively as they squealed in alarm. A moment later, he saw why the grazers ran. It emerged like liquid shadow, sleek, scaled, with 6 limbs ending in hooked claws. A hunter-class predator, one he had glimpsed only once before from the safety of his wrecked shuttle's viewport. Back then it had been awe. Now it was pure terror. The beast's tongue flicked the air. Its head swiveled. Its nostrils flared. The cubs went dead silent. Elias's pulse hammered. His branch spear felt like a toy in his grip. He could run, maybe, but the cubs. The beast lunged. Instinct overrode thought. Elias scooped the nearest cub under one arm, shoved the others behind him, and jammed his spear forward. By sheer dumb luck, or maybe the universe laughing, the sharpened wood struck the predator's sensitive snout. It howled, recoiling, blood spraying from the wound. Elias didn't wait. He grabbed the remaining cubs, bolted through the underbrush, and prayed the beast valued its nose more than a scrawny human and 3 snacks. Branches tore at his face. Thorns ripped his clothes. The cubs wriggled and squirmed, their claws digging into him. He ran until his lungs burned and his legs screamed. Only when the jungle fell silent again did he collapse, gasping. The cubs tumbled free. They stared at him, wide-eyed, making little chirps. Elias rolled onto his back, chest heaving. "Do you have any idea how much trouble you are?" One of them climbed onto his chest, purring like a saw blade. And damn it all, he laughed. Hysterical, exhausted laughter that echoed through the trees. The second complication was less funny. That night, as he tried to rest, he heard the roars again. The mother. Closer this time. Searching. The cubs stirred. They recognized her. They chirped back, high-pitched and eager. Elias froze. His fire crackled too loud, every spark a beacon. The roars moved nearer, crashing through the jungle. "She's looking for you," Elias whispered. "Of course she is. And if she finds you with me..." He pictured her jaws again, those eyes, the way she had hesitated last time. Would she hesitate twice? Or would instinct win? The cubs pressed close, trembling. Their tiny hearts thudded against his side. And Elias faced the cruel paradox: keep them quiet and hidden, or let them answer their mother and risk her wrath? In the end, he did the one thing he could. He picked up a cub, held it close, and whispered, "Shh. Just a little longer. Please." The mother's roars eventually faded into the distance. Elias lay awake until dawn, guilt gnawing at him. The third complication came with the morning rain. Torrential sheets battered his shelter, collapsing half of it. His fire hissed out. The cubs yowled miserably, huddling against him for warmth. Elias shivered, teeth chattering. Without fire, the jungle's damp chill seeped into his bones. He tried striking sparks with 2 stones until his hands bled. Nothing. The cubs cried louder. Their scales weren't thick enough yet to retain heat. If the storm lasted long, they'd weaken. Elias clenched his jaw. He had 2 options: wait and risk hypothermia, for himself and the cubs, or find shelter elsewhere. But moving in the storm meant exposure, predators, lightning strikes. Hell with it, he muttered, scooping them up. "We move." Hours later, half dead from exhaustion, he stumbled into the mouth of a shallow cave. Relief surged. Dry stone. Cover. The cubs collapsed onto the floor, trilling weakly. Elias sagged against the wall, clutching them close. "Safe," he whispered. "We're safe." But even as he said it, he knew the word was a lie. The cave reeked. Old bones littered the ground. Deep claw marks scarred the stone. This was no empty refuge. This was a lair. And by the sound of heavy claws approaching from the shadows deeper inside, its owner was coming home. The sound was unmistakable, claws dragging against stone. Elias froze, heart hammering. He clutched the cubs against his chest as though that frail gesture could shield them. The cave air grew hot with the musk of predator, sharp and suffocating. A massive shape emerged from the shadows. This one wasn't the cub's mother. Elias could tell instantly. The proportions were wrong, heavier, bulkier, scarred across its muzzle. Its eyes burned a deep crimson, not amber. Its growl wasn't a warning, it was a promise of violence. The cubs squeaked, huddling tighter. They knew. Elias forced his shaking legs to straighten. His brain screamed at him to run, but his instincts had been forged in a world where running from tigers, wolves, or bears meant death. Humanity had survived by facing nightmares with fire, tools, and madness. And Elias had just enough of all three. He set the cubs behind him, grabbed a length of bone from the cave floor, and snapped it across his knee. The jagged edge cut his hand as he lifted it like a spear. His blood smeared the surface, hot and slick. The predator stalked closer, saliva dripping onto the stone. Elias raised his voice, loud and shaking but firm. "You want them? You're coming through me first." The beast lunged. Elias dodged sideways, barely avoiding claws that gouged the rock where he'd stood. He stabbed with the bone spear, catching the predator's flank. The weapon snapped uselessly, but the sting drew a bellow of rage. The cubs yowled in panic. Elias scrambled, grabbing another bone. His eyes darted around the cave. Skulls. Femurs. Broken rib cages. A graveyard of meals passed. He realized the truth. This predator had been using the cave for years. Which meant... He glanced at the ceiling. The storm had seeped into the stone. Water dripped steadily, pooling into cracks, weakening it. Elias ducked another swipe, rolling across the ground. Pain shot through his shoulder. The cubs cried out. His body screamed at him to collapse, to surrender, but his mind snapped into brutal focus. He needed a plan. Not tomorrow. Not later. Now. The predator stalked again, cautious this time. It had felt his sting. Now it circled, growling low. Elias grabbed a skull, hurled it. It cracked against the beast's snout. Not much damage, but enough to buy a heartbeat. He grabbed another bone, swinging it like a club. The predator barreled into him, knocking him flat, its hot breath flooding his face. Elias jammed the bone between its jaws just as they snapped shut. Teeth crunched, splintering the makeshift wedge. He kicked upward, desperate, shoving it back. The ceiling dripped again. Another rivulet of water. His scientist's brain screamed at him. Mass, erosion, weak points. If he could bring it down. The predator charged again. Elias staggered backward, fumbling for a heavy femur. He hurled it upward with every ounce of strength he had. The bone smashed against the ceiling's crack, sending a shower of stone and water raining down. The predator flinched, snarling. Elias grabbed another. Through. Another. Through. Each impact widened the fissure. Pebbles cascaded. The cave groaned. The predator lunged a final time. Elias barely dodged, rolling across jagged stone. His hand landed on a sharp rib bone. He gripped it, slashing across the beast's eye. Blood sprayed hot. The beast howled, thrashing. The cubs screamed. And then the ceiling gave way. With a roar like thunder, half the cavern collapsed. A torrent of rock and debris slammed down, burying the predator in an avalanche of stone. Dust filled the air, choking, blinding. The ground trembled. Elias shielded the cubs with his body, curling around them as the world shook. His lungs burned, his ears rang. And then silence. When the dust settled, the predator was gone, crushed beneath tons of rock. Elias coughed, hacking dust from his throat. His arms shook as he uncurled from around the cubs. They were alive, shaken, frightened, but alive. They pressed against him, trilling softly, their tiny bodies warm in the cold cave air. Elias sagged back against the stone, every muscle screaming. "I'm still here," he rasped. "We're still here." But survival came with a cost. His shoulder throbbed, swelling. His hand bled freely where the bone had cut deep. He had no medical kit. Infection was no longer a possibility, it was a promise. And outside, through the dripping cave mouth, came another sound. A roar. Not the crimson-eyed predator. A different one. Lower. Louder. Familiar. The cubs perked up instantly, chirping, bounding toward the entrance. Elias's heart sank. The mother. Her shadow filled the cave mouth, enormous and terrible. Her eyes burned gold in the dim light. She saw the rubble, the blood, the crushed rival. And then she saw Elias, battered and broken, her cubs pressed close to his side. Elias knew this was it. He was spent. No cleverness left, no tricks. If she decided to end him, he couldn't stop her. The mother padded forward, her massive head lowering until her nose brushed his chest. He could smell the jungle on her, the iron tang of blood, the storm-washed musk of her scales. Her breath washed over him. The cubs chirped again, pawing at him, at her. One nipped her snout, another climbed onto his lap as if to demonstrate ownership. The mother's eyes narrowed. Elias forced himself to meet her gaze. His voice was hoarse but steady. "I didn't take them. They chose me." For a long, unbearable moment, predator and human stared at one another. Elias could almost hear the judgment in her gaze, the primal calculation, kill or tolerate. Finally, she snorted. The blast nearly knocked him backward. She nudged the cubs, chuffing low, then fixed him with one last stare that made his bones quiver. Then she turned, padded back into the jungle. The cubs didn't follow. They stayed. Elias exhaled, trembling. He should have felt relief. Instead, he felt the crushing weight of realization. The mother had spared him. But she had also left the cubs with him deliberately. This wasn't mercy. This was a test. And in the deadly jungle of Calceres-4, tests always came with consequences. Elias didn't sleep that night. The cubs did, curled against him in a little pile of scales, fur tufts, and stubby horns. Their breaths rose and fell like waves on a tide he couldn't escape. But his eyes stayed open, tracing the cracks in the cave ceiling where the collapse had spared him. Every sound of the jungle outside seemed louder now, every distant roar, every flutter of wings, every drip of water. The mother's decision haunted him. She hadn't simply tolerated him, she had chosen to leave her offspring in his care. That was worse than rejection. That was responsibility. "You're insane," Elias whispered to himself, stroking one cub's head absent-mindedly. "She thinks I can keep you alive. Me. A half-starved biologist with a broken shoulder and a stick for a spear." The cub purred at his touch. Elias groaned. Morning came with golden light filtering through the cave mouth. The storm had passed. The jungle steamed, every leaf dripping. Elias staggered outside, his legs trembling under his weight. The cubs followed like shadows. He paused at the treeling. The wreckage of his shuttle lay miles to the south, a twisted skeleton of metal. If he could reach it, maybe, just maybe, he could salvage the beacon. He had tried before and failed, but that was before he had an incentive stronger than survival. 3 chirping cubs that looked at him like he was their universe. "Fine," he muttered. "We head south. Beacon or bust." The journey became a lesson in insanity. Predators prowled at every step. Elias had learned to mask his scent with crushed leaves and mud. Now, with the cubs trailing him, he had to smear all of them like unruly toddlers at a daycare finger paint session. They squirmed, they sneezed, they tried to lick the mud off each other until he hissed, "Stop it!" like a frantic babysitter. Foraging for food became worse. He could survive on bitter roots and stringy fruit. The cubs? They were carnivores. They tried gnawing on a scavenger carcass until Elias dragged them away, cursing under his breath. He improvised snares, sharp sticks, even used rocks to bludgeon small lizards. Every meal was a battle. At night, he built fires and barricades, sometimes piling sharp branches into crude walls. The cubs, ungrateful little monsters, chewed his barricades into toys. And yet, somehow, they survived. Day after day, step after step, Elias found himself doing things no sane man should have attempted. Wrestling a six-legged monitor to the ground with his bare hands. Scaling a cliff face to steal eggs the size of his torso from a thunderbird nest. Diving into a river to drag out a flailing cub while a crocodilian beast snapped its jaws an inch from his leg. Each time, he thought, this is it. This is where I die. And each time, he didn't. The cubs grew bolder, stronger. Their scales thickened, their horns sharpened. They started to hunt alongside him, clumsy but determined. They learned his gestures. When he raised a hand to silence them, they quieted. When he pointed, they followed. And then one evening, as the sky burned orange, Elias realized something terrifying. He wasn't just keeping them alive. He was raising them. That night, he sat by the fire with the cubs sprawled across his lap. His shoulder throbbed, his body was a patchwork of bruises and scars, but his mind raced. If he reached the beacon, if rescue came, what then? Would the crew of a recovery ship accept 3 alien predator cubs climbing into their laps? Would the Galactic Council? He could already hear the bureaucrats' voices. Hazardous specimens, containment protocols, termination orders. His jaw tightened. The thought of anyone taking them, hurting them, no. Not while he breathed. Days later, when he finally staggered into the clearing where his shuttle lay in ruins, Elias felt a surge of triumph. The hull was twisted, the cockpit crushed, but the beacon casing was still intact. He pried it open with bleeding fingers. Inside, the components looked salvageable. Bent, corroded, but fixable. The cubs sniffed curiously at the wires, one trying to chew them until Elias swatted its nose. Not dinner, he snapped. This, he held up the beacon core, trembling, is our ticket home. Repairing it took 3 sleepless nights. He improvised solder from melted wiring, stripped insulation with his teeth, and rewired circuits using thorns as connectors. The cubs brought him scraps, shiny stones, bones, half-dead critters, as if trying to help. Finally, with the sun bleeding across the horizon, Elias pressed the activation switch. The beacon crackled, hissed, and then emitted a faint, steady pulse. He laughed, half mad, tears stinging his eyes. It's working! By God, it's working! He collapsed in the dirt, the cubs piling onto him. For the first time in weeks, hope didn't feel like a joke. But hope brought danger. The beacon's signal wasn't subtle. Scavengers came first, sniffing around the clearing. Then predators. Elias fought them off, spear flashing, cubs snarling beside him. The jungle seemed to sense the shift. That prey was calling to the sky. And then, on the 4th night, she came. The mother. She stepped into the clearing like a shadow crowned in horns. The cubs yelped with joy, bounding toward her. She sniffed them, nuzzled them, then turned her gaze to Elias. This time, there was no hesitation. She stalked closer, growling low, eyes like burning coals. Elias backed toward the beacon, hand gripping his spear. You want them back, he said, voice hoarse. But they chose me. I've bled for them. I've fed them. I've kept them alive when the jungle wanted them dead. The mother roared, shaking the trees. The cubs squealed, darting between them, torn between blood and bond. Elias raised his spear, every nerve on fire. He was no warrior. No soldier. Just a man who refused to give up. You'll kill me, fine. But you'll never make them fear me. The mother lunged. Elias braced for death. But the cubs moved first. All 3 darted between them, snarling, wings of their still stubby spines flaring. They yelled at their mother, a chorus of defiance that echoed across the clearing. The mother froze. Her eyes widened. She huffed, stepping back. The cubs pressed against Elias's legs, glaring up at her as if daring her to challenge their choice. And in that impossible moment, Elias understood. This wasn't a test anymore. This was recognition. The mother growled once more, softer, almost approving. Then she turned, vanishing into the jungle without another glance. Elias collapsed, shaking. The cubs swarmed him, licking his face, trilling in triumph. Hours later, the sky split with light. A rescue ship descended, engines flattening the trees. Elias staggered forward, cubs at his heels. The crew rushed out, staring in shock at the battered, half-wild human with 3 alien predators glued to his side. One officer raised a weapon. "Specimens! Contain them!" the cubs hissed. Elias stepped between them, voice like steel. "They're not specimens. They're mine." The officer hesitated. Elias's bloody, blazing eyes left no room for argument. When the ramp closed and the ship lifted off, the cubs huddled against him, wide-eyed at the hum of engines. Elias stroked their heads, exhausted but unbroken. He gazed out the viewport at the shrinking jungle. "They should have feared me," he whispered. "But instead, they climbed into my lap." And as the ship carried them toward the stars, Elias realized he didn't mind. Not one bit. Because somewhere in that deadly jungle, he had stopped being prey. And started being pack.